I want to welcome you to this memorial for Nathaniel Branden. Recognize and remember his many achievements and exceptional life. I'm David Kelley. I'm the founder and the principal at the Atlas Society, which is one of the sponsors of this event for Nathaniel. As I'm sure everyone knows, Nathaniel was for many years an associate of Ayn Rand. He launched the Nathaniel Branden Institute in 1958 to promote shortly after the publication of Ayn Rand's novel Atlas Shrugged, in order to promote the ideas and the philosophy that was in that book. His 20-lecture course, The Basic Principles of Objectivism, was the very first systematic statement of the philosophy of objectivism, and the first of many courses we offered to NBI. With Brand, he edited the Objectivist newsletter and then the Objectivist magazine, where his early work on psychology was published, along with most of Rand's most important philosophical essays. So it's really hard to imagine that there would have been an objectivist movement without Nathaniel. That period of his career was when I first became aware of him. I was a high school and college student trying to master philosophy myself. But I never met him then, and after his break to Brand, I kind of lost track, lost sight, because I was so focused on my career in philosophy. But he, of course, continued his work in psychology, and his many books and lectures and training for therapists and personal therapy report with so many patients just made him a star, a really stellar figure in his field, and in particular, a pioneer on the subject of self-esteem. So I finally met Nathaniel in the early 1990s after I started what is now the Atlas Society to promote objectivism in what I describe as a more open atmosphere. I won't go too much into that point, but many of you know. And at our organization's summer seminar in 1996, Nathaniel made the first of many appearances at our event. And his lecture on objectivism and self-esteem was also a first in another way, a larger scale. As he said in his opening remarks on that occasion, he said, "This is the very first time in 28 years that I have addressed an objectivist audience. And it is a more thrilling experience for me than I had any words to communicate. I feel that in being here, I've come back to a very important part of myself, from which I needed to separate for a while." In addition to the objectivist world, or at least my part of it, Nathaniel was also a major contributor to the wider libertarian movement. He brought his not only philosophical acumen and deep understanding, but also his immense expertise as a psychologist in how to communicate, how to persuade, and understanding human nature to the freedom movement. So I feel that we've lost a real giant, and I think you will appreciate that all the more from those who knew him well. So I'd like to call up some of the people who are going to tell you about the different facets of Nathaniel, beginning with John Fickewirth, a successful entrepreneur and longtime friend of Nathaniel's and Lee's. Please come on, John.
Lee Branden, members of the Branden family, ladies and gentlemen. Within the compass of this room are those gathered to both honor the life and mourn the passing of Nathaniel Branden. In doing so, our thoughts must first turn to his widow Lee and members of the Branden family, upon whom this loss presses the greatest. The Nathaniel that lived in our lives now must live in our hearts. The voice we once heard has been stilled, but what cannot be lost, what must not be lost, is what we learned from Nathaniel and what Nathaniel meant to us. As is natural in such circumstances, our minds turn to thoughts of remembrance. Nathaniel meant different things to each one of us, whether it was colleague, counselor, friend, husband, or family member. What was unique in everyone Nathaniel met was the same in everyone Nathaniel met, was his ability to see us for exactly who we are. No more fitting tribute can be given to any man than to say that he lifted his friends to his standards. Most of us will pass through our allotted time on earth, leaving hardly a mark. This cannot be said for Nathaniel. His accomplishments in the field of psychology, especially the realm of self-esteem, will be studied for generations to come. We are often accused of subscribing to the great man theory of history, the belief that from time to time among us comes a person whose actions change events. It is more fashionable today to say that the group, the thesis collective, or society deserves the credit for accomplishments. Yet is there any amongst us today whose life was not touched and bettered by Nathaniel? Are there any present who do not believe that our knowledge of psychology was increased to an incalculable degree by Nathaniel's work? There are great men, and a great man has walked amongst us. For many years, up until their split in 1968, Nathaniel was a protege of the novelist philosopher Ayn Rand. His separation from Miss Rand and objectivist orthodoxy, especially its simplistic understanding of psychology, enabled Nathaniel to enter his most productive phase. He was able to create a shelf, as authors are wont to say, of 21 important and groundbreaking books. Of course, a man is much more than the sum of his professional accomplishments. In many ways, what touches us most about any person is the individual impact he or she had upon us. Perhaps like many of you, I became first acquainted with Nathaniel through the recorded lectures of the Nathaniel Branden Institute. As a 19-year-old college student, and I assume for many of you, what we learned really opened our eyes. I remember clearly sitting in my folding chair in the Stanley Fold building in downtown Los Angeles as the reel-to-reel tape recorder slowly turned, being introduced to ideas that for the first time began to make the world understandable to me. We first met personally in 1969 when Nathaniel came to speak to a group of us at UCLA. He was always clear with me, and I assume with you as well, that we had but one life to live. We would get the most out of it if we lived it as consciously as possible. Now, Nathaniel never really invalidated the whole concept of unconsciousness. He just thought it should be limited to sleep, when submitting to the surgeon's knife, and root canals. However, as a way to manage one's life on a day-to-day basis, Nathaniel said it was most likely going to be unproductive. We learned from Nathaniel that consciousness is more than just being awake. It's a commitment to see, understand, and interpret the facts of reality as presented to us. The commitment to reality leads directly to self-acceptance and self-understanding. While in our own different ways we may well see ourselves as catalogs of errors, they are, after all, our errors. Nathaniel said of self-acceptance, quote, quite simply, realism. That which is, that which you think, that which you feel, that which you did. He taught us that the first step in changing our lives is to accept who we are and where we are in the world today. And that those who disown aspects of themselves are fated to mire in their problems forever. Nathaniel was clear that life requires courage, and from courage comes confidence. However, as we know, courage does not feel good. Courage is unpleasant. Courage causes fear and tension. However, the end result of courage is confidence. And we know confidence is marvelous. Confidence is self-esteem applied to action. When I think of the body of Nathaniel's work, what affected me and impressed me the most was his pioneering study in the area of self-esteem. Now, all of us in this room, I'm sure, think that the need for self-esteem is self-evident, which sadly is not the case. Nathaniel, in his promotion of self-esteem, had to deal with the usual nonsense that said valuing the self is somehow wrong, or at least antisocial. Those who promote genuine self-esteem must deal with a logic that runs somewhat along these lines. We did a survey of young ghetto drug dealers. We asked them if they liked themselves. When they answered in the affirmative, it showed that drug dealers have high self-esteem. Therefore, self-esteem is inexorably connected with bad behavior. And Nathaniel identified in his writings the 6 key ingredients of self-esteem. He called them his 6 pillars. The first is living consciously, the practice of being aware of exactly what you're doing. Self-acceptance, accepting who you are and where you are, and not disowning any aspect of you. Self-responsibility, the practice of owning one's own choices and actions. Nathaniel said, quote, "The paradox is that learning self-responsibility leaves you feeling lighter, not heavier, since your life is in your own hands." Self-assertiveness, the practice of taking your needs and wants seriously and undertaking what is necessary to gain them. Living purposely, the practice of setting goals and carrying them out. And personal integrity, loyalty to your values in action. The experience of self-esteem is that of being in control of your existence. And Nathaniel taught us, self-esteem is not a luxury, but a profound spiritual need. We often hear talk today about the need for kindness. The standard interpretation is make someone dependent, usually on the state. From Nathaniel we learn, quote, "The secret of true kindness is to see the strength in a person that he or she does not yet recognize." Each of us giving remarks today will focus on those aspects of Nathaniel's life that touched upon us most significantly. Looking back over his long and productive life and my relationship with him, I find myself at a poverty of words to express all that he meant to me. As with many of you, it is in moments of quiet contemplation that I look back over my time with Nathaniel, whether it be as a counselor, a dinner companion, or simply a great friend. The bright star that streaked across our heavens has been darkened, but yet what cannot be darkened, what must not be darkened, is the brightness Nathaniel shined upon our lives. Thank you.
Thank you, John, and thank you as well for helping sponsor this event. I'd like to call David Nott now, who is the president of the Reason Foundation. David.
Well, I'd like to thank Lee for the honor of being able to address you today. Nathaniel was a giant, as David pointed out, in the realm of psychotherapy, the libertarian movement, and objectivism. And he has a life that touched many. What I thought I would do with my time is share some personal reminiscences that to me illustrate the way he had such profound impact in those various ways. I was introduced to Nathaniel and Lee by our friend Jeremy Tarcher about a decade ago at Junior's Delicatessen in Westwood. And that introduced me to a series of interactions with Lee and Nathaniel that I cherish to this day. I'm remembering one specifically where I felt like a little fly on the wall. It was a small dinner group of us, and it was Sam Harris, who is one of the most famous atheists of today, with Nathaniel, who has been an atheist for a long time. And getting to see them compare notes about atheism was something that I will always treasure. And as I've been thinking back back about that dinner. I didn't realize it at the time, but looking back at that dinner, here was Nathaniel, who was an atheist long before it was fashionable and popular. He stood by those ideas when it was in fact exceedingly unpopular. In the afterword of Lolita, Nabokov wrote that he wrote one of 3 books that couldn't have been written. He said the second was on interracial marriage, and the third was an atheist who lives a happy, useful life and dies in his sleep at 106. So that I think it reflects the time and the courage that Nathaniel had for his ideas. What I might say is the way that he esteemed his own mind to believe what he believed in spite of how unpopular it was and in spite of the consequences, but to pursue the truth as he knew it. So fast forward, my wife came home from a psychotherapy seminar and she said, I heard this guy, he's great, he's local, you've got to watch his video, I think we should go see him. So I'm not, personally I don't like to go to therapy, so she's always was looking for angles. I watched the video, it made sense. I'm like, yeah, let's make an appointment. So we went to see Dr. Alan Berger, and the first thing we discovered was that he was a student of Nathaniel Branden's and a great admirer of Nathaniel's. And so then for many years, in seeing Dr. Berger, every time I would show up, he would ask me, how's Nathaniel? And we would catch up about him. And it's the kind of thing that the ideas, they affect one person, it changes how that person engages the rest of the world, and it's, we could talk about the books, but this was yet another example of how Nathaniel touched my life indirectly, even though he was a friend. So, in my role at the Reason Foundation, I talk to a lot of libertarians, and I get to hear how they came to these ideas. And Nathaniel Branden is often mentioned as the way that people came to think about individual liberty and freedom. And he is listed along the likes of Milton Friedman, John Stossel, Ayn Rand. I mean, these are incredible people that have changed the world, and it's a great loss for all of us that Nathaniel has passed. In terms of me personally, Nathaniel and I had the occasion to sit down for Reason TV to conduct an interview several years ago. And even just that interview, he had a clarity of mind, and he said things that I continually refer to in the way that I live my life for years later. And the phrase that I carry most closely was I was asking him about this tension between emotion and reason. And he said, there is no tension. Feel deeply to think clearly. Feel deeply to think clearly. So, ever since then, if I'm torqued up, if I can't sleep, it's in the middle of the night and my emotions are racing, I thank Nathaniel because I say these emotions are telling me something. They are a symptom. I need to heed them. I need to use them as the motive force and as the fuel for my thinking. And there's something about that glint in his eye, that clarity of purpose, that simple compression of truth, that a phrase like that can stick and we can carry it with us for a lifetime, even after he's gone.
Kozinsky is a judge on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in San Francisco. Previously Chief Judge. Alex.
I knew Nathaniel Branden, the giant, the public figure, long before I knew the man. I came to libertarianism and objectivism so late in life. I was almost 20. Before I discovered the Fountainhead. And I think the first time I saw Nathaniel's name was on the dedication page of Atlas Shrugged. Wow, Ayn Rand dedicated this book to Frank O'Connor, and Nathaniel Branden, who was this guy? He must be doing something special. And I became a voracious reader of Rand's work, and including her theoretical pieces, and then I saw Nathaniel's name pop up again and again. Books like Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal, and The Virtue of Selfishness. Now this was the days, and if you can remember, before the internet, you couldn't sort of get things that easily. You had to sort of scrounge to find really niche things like environmental libertarianism and offbeat topics like that. But I scrounged and I looked for things, and I would order them by mail from catalogs. And, you know, I love Rand's work, as I'm sure many here did, but I found parts of it, stuff she wrote, sort of perplexing. I don't think I'm the only one. And there were parts of her work that just I didn't quite get. And I would occasionally find stuff by Nathaniel Branden that terrified things. Now, I remember about, must have been about, I don't know, 1980 or so, I somehow, I think it must have been from a libertarian book service in San Francisco, I ordered a tape called Love and Sex in the Philosophy of Iron Band by Nathaniel Branden. And I said, oh, good. So I ordered it, and that was Nathaniel giving a lecture that was taken in Washington. And he hit a number of the points that had most troubled me about Rand's fiction. And I remember particularly, I still have the cassette, by the way. It's sort of worn, and you know, I must confess, I dubbed it to MP3. So I had a computer. Some would say it's a copyright infringement. I would say it's fair use. Paid for the original tape, preserving it. And tape recorders are getting more difficult to use. So I consider it to be fair use. And I'm going to make another fair use of it by playing a little excerpt of that tape to all of you. Because I don't think there's any way one can pay tribute to Nathaniel that is equal to his own words, because it's hard to raise sort of the depth and the texture and the subtlety of his thinking by just describing it. So I'm going to make another fair use here. This is a little excerpt where he deals, and I hope this works. I don't have an iPhone, I'm using my wife's iPhone, and I hope this works. If not, I have to call my wife up here to but this concerns what is probably the most famous sex scene in all of Rand's work, and one that has troubled many people. It troubled me when I read it, and you all know what I'm talking about, right? So let me just play, and I hope this comes through, and it's Nathaniel himself speaking. I must say, after I listened to it, things were much clearer.
Or with the trade of curse. I never met anybody who assumed that the work was sexually experienced, and I've asked a number of people in my younger years when that encounter takes place. Now, there is no real conveyance of the idea that not only Dominique, but Rourke is passing through an emotionally earth-shattering experience. So far as we can tell, the emotional explosion is all minds. He calmly gets up, leaves, and when, a day or two later, he gets a call to come to New York in connection with an architectural assignment, riding away on the train, he is astonished that even now he finds himself thinking of the woman. Now, the interesting point is that all my years I've never heard anybody draw attention to that. But think about this. A man like Rourke doesn't do an action of this kind lightly. The implication is there is really a passionate, intuitive, subconscious connection between these two people, which is at least as explosive for him as it is for her. If he is surprised the next day when he gets a call back to New York, she's still on his mind. If one took that literally, one would have to say this man is so alienated from his own feelings and his own emotions. For God's sake, don't let your dog marry him. It'll be a disaster.
Now, if I can fix this. As you can see from that, it's a sort of tour de force. Because the passage is troublesome, and it did trouble me, but not for the reasons I didn't think it was a very either. But there was something about the passage that troubled me. There was something about the way Rand portrayed the male-female relationship that just didn't jive. Until Nathaniel pointed it out and dissected it, I didn't quite get it. It was really quite annoying. And this was quite a bit about, and he does it with precision, and he does it with humor, and he does it with subtlety. And I must say this, I didn't know any of this at the time because I had not been immune to the intricacies of the relationship between Nathaniel and Ayn Rand and the whole explosion. I would learn that much later. But given that this was after the break of Rand, I thought he was exceedingly generous and exceedingly, I might say, objective in his analysis of her and her work. And that is what struck me about Nathaniel and my sort of personal knowledge of him. I got to know him around 1989 when I was called upon by the Wall Street Journal to review his book. And I wrote a piece which is called, Life is Not a Novel. And here was my concluding paragraph, which I will quote, because it's always good to quote myself. It says, the book provides valuable insights into the life of a great thinker and her followers, warns of the dangers of cultism, points out the positive aspects and the hazards of Rand's philosophy, and provides an introduction to Mr. Branden's own significant work on the psychology of self-esteem. Not bad for a story that is often as gripping as well an Ayn Rand novel. I like the read quite a bit. I rather like the book quite a bit. But there were two words and a punctuation mark in the book I was not happy about. And that was the first two words of the title, followed by the quote. And I think maybe that came through in a little bit in my review. And Nathaniel figured out who I was. That was also in Los Angeles. He called me. And he was generally pleased with the review, but there was this undercurrent of unhappiness. I was glad to see that when he reissued the book, those two words in the colon were removed. It is much more fitting for somebody of Branden's generosity of spirit and just broad intellectual powers to make this something other than a personal story. Oops, that wasn't for me. I last saw, the last time I visited Nathaniel, Marcy and I think it was must have been his 65th birthday party. He and Devas had a large event at their house in the Hollywood Hills. And I remember Nathaniel being glowing and being standing up and addressing his guests, and the light sparkled in his eyes, and he says, "I feel good." And he looked good, and he looked happy, and I was very happy about that. I last saw him at the premiere of Atlas Shrugged 2. Well, you know, I had a part, not a big part, but it was there nonetheless. And Nathaniel was there. He was in a wheelchair. He was obviously suffering, and he still had a spot in his eyes. He recognized me. I said hello. The emails that he would occasionally send me, and he did send me emails for many years, commenting on my opinions, always with a little wit and a little charm, and sometimes a little criticism. He wasn't always complimentary, but he was always constructive. He didn't say much, and I was sorry to see him diminished so much. He was a great man. He shed light on all of us, and I shall miss him as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alice. I remember dreaming of arguing with one of America's best jurists about fair use in this case. So my feeling on that story is calm. I'd now like to call Warren Farrell. Warren is the author of, among other books, Why Men Are the Way They Are and The Myth of Male Power, which were topics of lots of discussions, I understand, between Nathaniel and Warren. So Warren, if you'll join us.
I was listening to that tape and thinking about listening to Nathaniel analyze 50 Shades of Grey. I think that one of the best ways to memorialize someone, especially someone like Nathaniel who's made great contributions, is to not just talk about the great contributions, but to have that great contribution be part of the memorial service. One of Nathaniel's great contributions, in my experience, is sentence completion. And sentence completion is when I use it in workshops, I find it sort of draws out from each person in the workshop the unconscious part of them that they would not otherwise have revealed. But it only draws that out when they are using it quickly, when they don't think ahead of time about a rational argument about it. So I'm going to ask you and I to all together work on doing a quick sentence completion. And the sentence completion, I'm going to ask you to prepare for that by choosing someone next to you that you don't know. If worst comes to worst, choose somebody you know. And you pair off with them, just the two of you. I'm going to ask you to complete a sentence. And that sentence, well, the stem of that sentence is, without Nathaniel Branden in my life, I. So the stem of the sentence is, without Nathaniel Branden in my life, I. So now find somebody you don't know, or somebody, again, who
So now we'll just find
don't start until I give you the go. Devers needs a partner. All right. Okay, I'm going to ask you to say the stem. And remember, this is not a stem that you say and you hesitate. You say the stem and you complete the sentence. The stem is, without Nathaniel Branden in my life, I. Ready, get set. Without Nathaniel Branden in my life, I. Go!
It's the last part.
You bring the last part.
What did Mr. Henry?
You're talking to the person next to you. You're dying.
But I had to think about it, and I found that. So
You're not going to do this one time. You're doing it 5, 6 times. You're not hesitating. You're going, without Nathaniel Branden in my life, I. Go! And complete that sentence. Now, switch partners and then switch sides and do the same thing again. The new person say, without Nathaniel Branden in my life, I. Complete that sentence. Ready? Go.
without Nathaniel Branden in my life. But I know this.
Ready, get set, hold. Give yourself a hand. There's a great knew that once you started appreciating the pendulum, it would be hard to stop. I think a memorial service, you often hear about how much we loved the deceased. One of the great ironies and one of the great gifts of Nathaniel is that he helped us love ourselves. And so you're loving somebody who helped us go inside of ourselves and find the love that we were maybe missing. But he asked us to do it not just by thinking of ourselves as in narcissism, but about taking responsibility, about being accountable, about making ourselves live consciously all the time, making ourselves forever aware. This I really miss about Nathaniel. This sense of truth, getting at without compromise, without the hallmark version of truth. I miss Nathaniel a lot as a human being, but I also miss Nathaniel as a human being. He was my life's favorite rough, tough cream puff. I met Nathaniel about 3 decades ago. I sent him a copy of a manuscript of Why Men Are Who They Are, having no idea that he could respond. He responded with a quote. About 3 months later, he called me up and said, we people who are famous like I am, I'll give you quotes, and we don't really read quotes very carefully. I reread your book. Actually, I read it for the first time, and I'd like to invite you and your partner up to Lake Arrowhead to spend the weekend with me in Devers. And that began, 30 years ago, began a 30-year relationship that lasted mostly through what I call EDB, the era of Devers Branden, who's sitting right here and helped facilitate many beautiful hours that I'll share a little bit about. Among the things that I observed in my many Thanksgivings and weekends with Nathaniel is that there are ideologues and then there are also intellectuals. When I first met Nathaniel, I thought when it came to objectivism, when it came to libertarianism, he was just an ideologue. And it was difficult to get Nathaniel to think about something other than the libertarian way of designing the government and designing the lack of government. But it was but when you sat Nathaniel down and there was a discussion, Nathaniel was much more an intellectual than an ideologue. And that was manifested in the way that he would conduct Thanksgiving dinners, the way he would conduct any dinner at his house. There would be born-again Christians. There would be other atheists. There would be people who were liberals. There would be people who were conservatives. There were people who couldn't care less about politics and thought almost any politician was corrupt. There would be people who was, but there would be people who were strong feminists who believed the world was created by men, designed by men to benefit men at the expense of women. And there were feminists who said the world was created by the need to survive, and we've survived as a result of having dealt with that well, and both fathers and mothers made sacrifices to make their children's lives better than theirs. And what Nathaniel would do with that information was just let us talk. But there was always, through Nathaniel's endeavors, sort of administration of that, and the hosting, there was always a very clear signal. And that is, everyone will respect everyone. And his job was to facilitate, and Deborah's job was to facilitate. Deborah would be out preparing the next course in the kitchen, and she'd run back in there listening to the things that were being said, make an intelligent contribution, add to the food on the table, and then go back and prepare the next meal on the table. And then she'd come back, and Nathaniel would always be sure to integrate her, but make sure that the crucial message was that everyone shall be respected, that everyone shall feel heard. He reminded me, in his ideology, very much of a Shakespearean little excerpt. I remember when, in Shakespeare and Hamlet, when Hamlet said to Horatio, "There are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy." And Nathaniel lived that. He also lived roomy, out beyond ideas of right doing and wrongdoing. There is a field. I will meet you there. I've also heard many sad moments from Nathaniel. When he would isolate me and say, "Warren, I'm really sad about the evolution of self-esteem. I'm sad that it's been hijacked into gold stars being passed out to everybody, to trophies being passed out to everybody. Warren, there's something in competition that really brings out the best of us. There's something in competition that when we lose, from that loss emanates self-responsibility, emanates introspection, emanates our finding the better self that is often lost when everybody is just given the gold star for free." This saddened Nathaniel deeply. My best solace to Nathaniel at that moment is that this is the evolution of self-esteem in this culture. It's in its infancy yet. It will go into its adolescence. It will become an adult. You may or may not be around here to see it. But human beings are not like you are, said Nathaniel. They don't absorb as quickly. It takes time for them to integrate into the culture. Yet, one of the things that Nathaniel, I don't think, gave himself enough credit for was his contribution of living consciously, the first part of self-esteem. How the name has changed to mindfulness. But mindfulness is a significant part of our culture now. And the seeds of that were planted, I believe, in that living consciously. That Nathaniel putting that out there. Nathaniel was sometimes a critic of feminists. And his criticism of feminists was a very powerful statement as to the degree to which he valued women. He felt he held women as accountable as he wanted to hold men. And so when feminists were blaming men, he said, no, this is a world where men and women are doing their best. Be accountable, look inside of yourself, and make sure that accountability goes both ways. Yes, men need to be held accountable. Yes, men need to take responsibility. Yes, men need to be introspective, and also women do. And when I hold women to it, he felt the greatest amount of pain in regard to this after the Passion of Iron Man sold well, and then he felt on Judgment Day, he was very generous in his commentary about the marriage, but yet he felt the few times that he did make criticism, he was treated very with an enormous acrimony about that, and it wounded him because he felt, and he said, Warren, why isn't there such a willingness to be accountable when I critique my former wife, former relationship, as there is when I am critiqued? When Nathaniel was first working on the 6 pillars of self-esteem, he did it in his playful way. As you all know, Nathaniel's playfulness is just wonderful. He asked me to guess what the 6 pillars would be. And I said, I can only think of 4, Nathaniel. He said, okay, give it to me. Well, the first one was Ayn Rand. The second one was Barbara Biden. The third was Patricia Scott. And the fourth was, there was Branden. This is before they came into his life. He says, no, Warren, it's my self-esteem that attracted these women. And I said, well, I can see a little bit of that, Nathaniel. It's your self-esteem, your good looks, your smile, that twinkle in your eyes, and that sense that I can get away with anything with that inner smile and that twinkle in my eyes. And he agreed. I want to not only acknowledge the power of the phenomenal women that Nathaniel attracted into his life, and the role they played both being strong and being supportive. The juggling act that was required to be someone who loved Nathaniel. I also want to acknowledge the many, many days that I spent with Devers and the enormous contributions that she made to hosting, to being a part of, to being supportive, to being loving, to being, to helping Nathaniel shine, but also not making herself disappear in the background. I want to acknowledge also Lee, who had it in many ways the toughest, being with Nathaniel in his powerful days, but seeing him lose some of that power year after year, spending thousands of hours with him, supporting him, and caring for him. And now, today, out beyond ideas of right doing and wrongdoing, there is a field where we will meet Nathaniel Branden.
Yes, thank you. And now, Patrick Gentempo, who is the CEO, founding CEO of Action Potential Holdings, a long-time friend, and I think, what's the word, mentoree? I think Nathaniel was Patrick's mentor, and I know Patrick has long ways with him. So Patrick, please come up and share your thoughts.
Thank you. I certainly appreciate the opportunity to be able to share some of my thoughts and experiences with Nathaniel. And as an objectivist and somebody who's up to any important task and wants to go after with self-esteem in the context that Nathaniel would describe it and go after it, I feel like I want to go in and tackle this opportunity to share my thoughts, feelings, sentiments, and reminiscence with Nathaniel. However, it's a really tough task. How do you try to characterize subjectively through your own experience, objectively through taking a step back and looking at a man's life, such as Nathaniel, and translate that to an audience? One thing I can say from the bottom of my heart is that I appreciate you all being here. I appreciate the fact that you showed up, that it means something, that Nathaniel meant something, and quite frankly, when we try to characterize the extent of Nathaniel's impact on the world, I'm very confident in the fact that none of us in this room can try to measure It is immeasurable, and quite frankly, I think there's going to be several generations that go by before anybody in this world really knows the extent of his impact. Ironically, Nathaniel probably understood that at least, and I'll talk about that a little bit. I think we all know Nathaniel's work, and I was very happy to experience through the other presenters Nathaniel's work and what it meant to them, and their translation of some of that work into the world. My goal here today is to share with you some of my personal experience with Nathaniel, and also what he's meant to me, and maybe some things that you might not know about Nathaniel. And you took the time, effort, and energy to show up here, and I'd love for you to leave with a few things that I know about Nathaniel that have absolutely transformed and impacted my life, and I want to find a way, even though Nathaniel is physically gone, I want to find a way to still have him impact your lives here on an ongoing basis. Before I met Nathaniel, I of course knew of him, and like probably everybody here, I read Atlas Shrugged, the Fountainhead, the impact it had. I found my way to the Nathaniel Branden Institute tapes and consumed them, and it was completely life-changing, life-altering, radical impact. And then some years ago, I had the opportunity to see that he was speaking in New York City. My wife and I reside outside of New York City, and I saw that what is now the Atlas Society was hosting their summer program, and there was Nathaniel Branden on the program, and I said, we have to go. And sure enough, we went, and I sat through his lecture, and I approached him after the fact. And the man who I looked in his eyes for the first time physically, who shook my hand with that smile that you all know, was not the man I expected to meet personally in this respect. If you listen to the Nathaniel Branden Institute tapes of a man who was quite a young man at that time, the seriousness of his voice and of his ideas and of his tonality and his firmness was palpable through listening to the audios. Yet I met a man who was just bright, smiling, he lit up, and it was like I was suddenly sort of speechless and disconnected. But we had a conversation, and I invited him to come and speak at events that I would hold, and we, over time, developed a relationship that was quite significant and very special. Nathaniel would refer to me as his adopted son, and I would refer to him as my adopted father. It was this very spiritual experience in that respect. And he introduced me to who is now my best friend, John Butcher. He always said to me, there's this guy in Chicago, I think you should meet him. I just have this feeling you two should meet. And he caused that meeting to happen. And of course, he was 100% right. And John and I have become the best of friends and still are to this very day. And at one point, this is maybe one of the things I wanted to share with you. At one point, when we were all together, and Nathaniel's health was starting to fail, although he was, consciously, still very there. And John had asked him a really important and I think significant question. Nathaniel, look, you're pushing 80 now. We're several decades behind you. What would you tell yourself 30 years ago? What would you tell yourself that you wish you had learned when you were our age? And he got very serious. And the first thing he said, which I thought this was a brilliant question by John incidentally. The first thing Nathaniel told John was this. He said, I wish I had learned earlier in life that leisure is a valid human activity. And I have to tell you, as objectivists where productive activity is your noblest goal, learning or hearing that from Nathaniel Branden was transformation. He said some other things too that were powerful. He said, I wish I had discovered earlier that I was not alone. He said, I felt like an alien when I was a child. And when I grew up, I felt different. I couldn't relate to other people. He said, I didn't recognize that there were other people who lived consciously, who were values-based in their life, that were like me. So I felt like an outcast as someone who lived in this lonely world. And I wish I discovered earlier that these people are out there, I just have to make an effort to go out and find them. One thing he said to John, which this was a very poignant moment that I witnessed, he was saying this really to both of us. He said, I can't help but feel that my best years are behind me. And John looked at him and said, well, Nathaniel, they better be. Nathaniel looked up startled and said, and just put out his hand and said, you got me. Of course they better be. Look at the years that are behind him. Look at what he's given to the world. Look at the experiences he had. Another thing that I've heard him mention more than a few times, he said, when I wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, I can't roll over and hug my books. And this again went to his work ethic and his drive to produce, which was insatiable. I mean, if you know Nathaniel, you know that his level of consciousness that would radiate out of his eyes when he looked at me was significant. It was this thing that couldn't be turned off, even when he was in cognitive decline, which was an irony in and of itself. A man who lived from his brain to go down this abyss into this cognitive decline where he could not really communicate anymore. I would spend Tuesdays and then I moved it to Mondays eventually, but a half hour every week I had a Skype meeting with him. And little by little, as we Skyped and we would talk, he could talk less and less and less to a point where we literally would spend a half hour and just look at each other. Yet he still was trying to communicate. He was still trying to have something come across through that video camera in front of a computer, having a hard time even sitting up. It was just this thing that there was this blockage or this veil. You could see behind it there was this force peeking out every once in a while. That was the thing. At one point, I remember when I used to introduce him at programs, I would introduce him and I would refer to him as a genius. And he came over to me really angry. He wanted to reprimand me at one point. He got done with his talk, he came down and said, sit down, I need to talk to you. I said, yes, I did. He said, stop referring to me as a genius. I'm not a genius. And I looked at him, I said, Nathaniel, let me talk about the varied things that you've done in your life. And I started to list this and this and this, and then the varying ideas and the 6 pillars of self-esteem and the work that he's done, starting from his young age. And I kind of took maybe 5 or 7 or 10 minutes and just overviewed all those things. I said, Nathaniel, if that's not genius, what is? I said, okay. He was a genius. But some of the irony was the fact that he really it wasn't palpable to him what his effect on the world was directly, because he was, as he put it, maybe this was the greatest backhanded compliment Nathaniel ever gave me, as we were sitting at a table and he was looking at some of the ones who were his mentees, if you will. He was a mentor to us. And he said, this was in Las Vegas, he said, Patrick is the most like me because he's very self-absorbed. I wasn't sure how to take that exactly, but I think I thanked him, I wasn't sure. But in the end, when he couldn't speak, what I would do is I would do a screen share, and I would go onto Amazon.com, and I would pull up his books, and I'd show him the books, and then I would go to the comments in the book, and I would start to read to him the things that people posted to say what this work meant to them. And I'd see his eyes get teary, and I'd see him start to reflect upon it. And I know that there were stories, the one story that he told about when he was at a theater, and he was on a break, and he went out, and somebody approached him and said, you're Nathaniel Branden, I can't tell you what you meant to me. And he went back to his seat with tears in his eyes, recognizing the fact that he's unconscious to the way that he touched people in the world, and it was an uncommon way in which he did it. Nathaniel, probably the most poignant moment I ever had with him, after giving a 4-hour lecture on the 5 pillars, the 5 branches of philosophy. And we were up on a mountain in Colorado, in this kind of retreat format, and it was late at night, and he just flew in that day, and he was going to be presenting the next day, and he was sitting in the audience, like right here where I could see him, and he was leaning in, and he kept focused attention. It was scaring the crap out of me. You know, for 4 hours as I'm speaking and presenting, saying, I'm feeling kind of uncomfortable. Here I am presenting the 5 branches of philosophy. And there's, you know, Nathaniel staring at me, and I have no idea what's going on in his head. And I'm saying, okay, well, you know what? I'll probably get some really good feedback how I can upgrade this presentation. And it was maybe the most serious I ever saw him when he came out from the audience, like straight ahead of everybody, he grabbed me by both hands and held me like this, and he looked up and he said, I want you to listen to me very carefully right now. He said, what Branden once gave me, I now give. And I was speechless, and I wasn't even sure exactly what he meant. But what I do know is this, that as much as he made that transition, which is an extraordinary transition from the world of philosophy to the world of psychology, and the way that he bridged these things, which is unprecedented, that his teaching from the Nathaniel Branden Institute, his mastery of the 5 branches of philosophy, his reverence for the structure that brought to thinking and algorithm to frame up life and existence and be able to utilize it in a practical way in the world, was something that never left him. And that in his later parts of his life, we could still have conversation around that. He was an amazingly generous man with his feelings and his emotions. And, you know, I can say that when we first started experiencing, my wife Lori and I can remember going with Devers and Nathaniel to an auction in New York City and walking the streets, and I couldn't keep up with the guy. These guys were flying down the street in New York. And he had that energy, that abundant energy. And he just had this love of life and this zest and this amazing you know, intellect with precision of words that was uncharacteristic of any other human being I've ever met. His precise use of language. And then we would come out in later years and with Lee, and as Lee, you know, especially in the later years when things got tough, you know, how we would communicate about Nathaniel and what Nathaniel, how he looked to her for help and support in the circumstance, and watching that transition was a very tough thing to watch. And in the end, you know, we sit here today and try to capture that in some meaningful way that I'm not sure that anybody really can. But what I can tell you is that he was a profound and absolute lover of life. And that one thing he's done is given more life and higher quality life to millions of people that we'll never be able to fully understand, be able to fully measure, be able to fully wrap our minds around. But the fact that we're here today to pay tribute to this giant, this intellectual giant, who had a spirit that was beyond anything I've ever witnessed in my life, is a testament that he lived and will always live. Thank you very much.
I know there were some other people who wanted to share their thoughts. Let me start with John Aguilar, who couldn't be here, unfortunately. He started at the Alex movies and Branden Nathaniel movies. And he just wanted me to share the memory of when Atlas Shrugged Part 1 was made on a shoestring budget with on a very short timetable with an independent production. The very first screening in Studio City in California, Lee and Nathaniel came, and as they Barbara, I was there. And I know of all the people whose reactions John wanted to get, I think Nathaniel's mattered most. So when I can't remember Nathaniel's words exactly, but when he said, in effect, yes, that's Alice, John knew he was on the right track. So I know Manny Klausner, if you would come up and share your thoughts.
Well, it's quite moving and quite profound when you hear the audience today with all the comments that we've heard about a man that's had such a major impact on our lives and our culture. Nathaniel I wanted to speak to as somebody that got to know Nathaniel as an editor of Reason magazine when Bob Poole, Tibor McCann, and I took over the magazine from a student at Boston University, Lanny Friedlander, back in 1970. We had big plans for Reason, and we knew that this struggling magazine, which had a few hundred subscribers, needed most of all, in addition to an infusion of some money, was to get some more subscribers. And so we had a pretty fancy business plan, and the cardinal aspect of our business plan in the beginning days was to do an interview with Nathaniel and to offer that as a premium to new subscribers. This was after the break with Brand, which occurred in 1968, and he hadn't really said anything publicly. So this is going to be a highly anticipated event for all of us, and it certainly met our expectations as it turned out. The way we promoted it, we rented it, this is part of Nathaniel's entrepreneurial spirit. I didn't hear too much about that as such, but in addition to being a profound scholar of thinking, a philosopher and a psychologist, he was also quite an entrepreneur. What he did, NBI, the Academic Associates List, he built a business of selling ideas that reshaped the world. And that's not an easy business to build. So he was the best source that we could have had, and it worked out very well for us. We rented his list, we mailed to the entire NBI list, and I don't remember now if it's the NBI or the Academic Associates list, and we mailed out about 50,000 mailing pieces or so. We got 5,000 new subscribers, which really put Reason on the map, and we knew we were off to something big. The name of the interview was called, what did we call it? We called it Breaking Free. And it's a remarkable cover, not one of my favorite Reason covers, but the other Reason website can see all the old covers, and among all the others, it's pretty good. But I want to say, when we interviewed Nathaniel, I met him in connection with the interview. I was there with Bob and Tibor and a couple of the other Reason editors who went to Nathaniel's home. We had a very interesting interview with Nathaniel. We went through the process of doing some editing of the interview. And Nathaniel was very, Alex remarked and others, he was very charming, very witty. He had an incisive mind, formidable intellect, and all that came out in a real individual that you felt great to be near him and to be able to interchange with him. So the last thing I made a comment about Nathaniel's desire, if he had gone back 30 years earlier, to spend more time, take leisure more seriously. And my wife, Willette, and I did have the pleasure with Devers and Nathaniel to have some moments of leisure with dinner, the four of us in his home. And Nathaniel never really had the same passion for food and wine that Willette and I do. But he enjoyed seeing our enjoyment, and it was always a pleasure. You know, he wasn't rolling along with the same velocity as we were, but he sure had a good time too, and so did Devers. So we always really treasured those evenings very much. Something, by the way, in looking over Nathaniel's background before today's event, I know something that I don't recall occurred to me before. Nathaniel has had a degree in psychology from UCLA. He had a master's in psychology from NYU. I also have a degree from UCLA in political science, as it was, and I have my law degree, I have 2 law degrees from NYU. So we actually had something in common in many ways. There were a number of similarities, and he would really, I felt, was one of the great, when you think of people that have something to offer, something to contribute, this has been told very profoundly today. Nathaniel, both in his writings, his tapes, and was very zealous, and thank you for this claim made, and in his personality, in his demeanor. He was a truly profound person, and you couldn't help but relate to. You learn from him, you admire him, and in many ways you can awe of him. And he was just extraordinary. So I'd like to make a contrast I think is interesting. We're coming to talk about Nathaniel, but Nathaniel was truly a friend of reason, of our editors, and Brian Dowdy, his history of the libertarian movement. He was very helpful to Brian, giving him details that only Nathaniel had to aid him in this. If you haven't seen the frolicking history of the libertarian movement, you got to look at Brian's book. It's great. Nathaniel was a very good source that Brian used. But there's another aspect about after the break. The objectivists were required to revile Nathaniel after the break in 1968. And we saw that reason in ways that were both direct and indirect. Indirectly, when we sent out, in 1971, we did a faculty registry, and we listed faculty members of major colleges and universities throughout Canada and the United States who had subjects. They didn't have to be libertarians or conservatives. As long as they had a subject to teach, they could be socialists, that would be of interest to people who took liberty seriously. And we sent letters to all the people that we knew, all the names of academics that we knew, students at these universities, that they would give us additional names. Milton Friedman gave us a beautiful name. It's a great project. We'll do everything we can to help you, and here's some names. And then we got some letters from a few people who were still hardcore followers of Ayn Rand, who had either self-intolerance or worse. They'll do nothing to participate. Please do not put me on the list. I'll have nothing to do with reason and anything that you were supporting. So you saw a lot of this really full-fledged animosity. Well, it came up in another way with reason, because we published in 1973, we published a special issue about Ayn Rand, and it was a very reverential issue. We had very good articles. There was some original scholarship that was done. Tibor McCann, who's one of our editors, who was a philosopher and been a follower of Rand, and was one of those that was put on the blacklist for reasons that no sane person would understand. Yeah, it was quite an issue. And as editor of the magazine at the time, I wrote to Rand. I asked her if she could get consent, if she would like to participate, we asked her specifically in the issue, or she'd like to recommend anybody who would be very interested. And she never responded, which was no surprise, because this is after we published the interview with Nathaniel, so I wasn't deluding myself. But we also asked her in the letter if she had any objection to our using her likeness, because we won't plan to use that on the cover. They're very striking covers. It's one of my favorite covers. And we never got a response, which was no surprise, because that was sort of pro forma for Ayn and people that she didn't admire. And then I wrote again. I said, well, we hadn't heard from our letter, and I just wanted to know if I don't get any response, I'll assume that you have no objection to our using your likeness. And we thought we had a right to use it, but I was being respectful. Now, in this case, I'm going to be a lawyer to represent me if we can get to sue what we know. And we got a letter, actually, from Ayn Rand's intellectual property lawyers in New York City. And it was a well-written, stern letter claiming that we had committed various legal violations by coming out with the cover of Ayn Rand without her consent and then using it in later promos. And that was the basis of this kind of narrowly selected instance, which was the strongest case they could make. We still felt we had a good defense. And I actually called, as the old days before email and other means of communication, but I called a lawyer, and I tell the story. It's a funny little video that we have on the Reason websites on YouTube. My experience when Ayn Rand threatened to sue Reason. And Ayn Rand was famous at the time. She would sue people who were threatened to sue librarians. I mean librarians, not libertines or libertarians, but librarians who were collecting Ayn Rand's work to put in college libraries. And if they would include it in the libertarian collection, they would get a letter from the lawyers. If you do that, you're going to get sued. So there were some weird things that some of us know more about than others. But, you know, Branden and Nathaniel was a living example of somebody who showed that you could admire Rand and advocate her ideas, but it didn't have to be linked with a blind allegiance to her as a person, and that you didn't have to be an official Randian to spread the essence and the strong parts of her work. So I think it's interesting to see the support of Nathaniel and contrast that with Rand. And here, Reason was in the business of promoting ideas to people who took liberty seriously. We weren't sectarian, we weren't just objectivists or just Randian. So I just wanted to leave you with these comments. Nathaniel was a great figure, and we learned a lot from him. He was a powerful source of insight, and I thank you very much for that for me speaking.
Joel, I know you had some thoughts, and Joel is a psychologist. I think it's fair to say you learned significantly from Nathaniel.
I first met Nathaniel in Endeavors back in 1980 when I was 20 years old, just knee-high to a grasshopper, as Nathaniel said to me. And at 20, there's a lot of competing ideas about how to live, how you're supposed to live, what you're supposed to do. And from both of them, I got some fundamental ideas that helped me live my life all my adult years. From Endeavors, I got clearly the importance of happiness. That it's not something that just happens. It's something that you work for, something that you earn. Aristotle said happiness is the meaning and purpose of life, the whole aim and end of human existence. I suspect that Endeavors might add something like, so what are you going to do about it? Nathaniel certainly echoed that in a lot of ways. What I got from him fundamentally was a sense of moral courage and moral clarity and moral confidence. Your life is yours to live on your terms, by your values, according to what brings you happiness. And it's up to you to sort all that out. He wrote one time in a book back when I was in my 20s to Joel, who doesn't need anybody's permission to be happy and successful. And that could be just kind of some cute words or some nice sentiments, but for him, it was really more like a self-evident truth. You want to live a good life? You want to live well? You have to take possession of your life. You have to. No other way to do it, sweetheart. When I was at one point feeling a little burdened by the consciousness that takes, I said to him, sometimes I just wish I could be one of the guys. And he looked at me sort of knowingly and he said, you know, very few people worth a damn are one of the guys. And that's that depth of clarity and understanding has seen me through in ways that I can't even begin to express. The other thing that was very profound for me is I asked him once, what do you do with your clients? What's the most important thing you do with them? He thought for a minute and he said, I look for the best in them. I look for the very best in them. Even if they don't see it themselves, even if they don't know it's there, I speak to that part and I try and draw that part out. And that's a lesson that has affected me deeply. It's affected how I treat my clients, how I treat the people in my life, how I treat my family. But what I think about most immediately when I think of Nathaniel is his smile and that little twinkle in his eyes. Nathaniel, as I knew him, was a very mischievous man. And when I was young, it was sometimes a little disconcerting because I never quite knew what to expect. But that sense of playfulness and mischief affected me emotionally in such a deep way, such a good way, that's what resonates with me more than anything. There are a lot of specific things like this that I loved about Nathaniel. But I also just loved him. He was good to me. He didn't particularly have to be, but he was always dear to me, and I'll miss him. And I'm so deeply, deeply grateful to have had him in my life.
I think we have really time for a little more, so if you'll indulge me, and then we will prepare to refreshments shortly. What we've heard tonight is such a full account of man, and I want to add one more contribution to that experience. So Judge Lyson will come up.
Thank you, guys. So Warren earlier asked us to do sentence completion, and that was a fun exercise. The answer that I gave immediately that came to my mind, if Nathaniel hadn't been in my life, I wouldn't have accomplished what I've accomplished. I wouldn't be who I am today. I'm not the only one here that had a socially awkward teenage years of being reclusive and uncomfortable, but Nathaniel to me was like a hand outstretched when I felt like I was in a dark hole of weird years and uncomfortableness. I feel like I was raised by Nathaniel more than my own parents. If you go back, let's say 16 years ago when I was a young 18-year-old, I would drive out to pretty much any book signing that I saw that Nathaniel was going to be at in Southern California. Didn't matter if it was Orange County or wherever, I would drive out to be there, just for the chance to see him. And I never got a chance to talk to him back then, because I would just be shuffled along in this line of fans, and it just got him to sign my book and I would go. About 5 or 6 years ago, I reconnected with Nathaniel at Bob Balaka's salons that he would host at his house for objectives salons, and I got a chance to connect and talk to Nathaniel, and eventually we became friends. But what that really meant was when he had a computer problem, he would call me up and I'd help him fix it, something like that. Later, he stopped driving, and when he did, I started giving him rides to places once in a while. His wife Lee appreciated it because I relieved a little bit of pressure on her back, and I appreciated it because I got a chance to talk to him some more, which was amazing for me. I eventually held a few events at my place for him as a speaker, and then I threw 2 birthday parties for him, big parties, for his 81st and his 82nd birthday. And to me, this was just amazing because Nathaniel was my hero, my greatest hero alive. He was a legend to me. If I could go back in time and tell my 18-year-old self that one day you're going to become personal friends with Nathaniel Branden and you're going to host his birthday parties at your house in Bel Air, 18-year-old me wouldn't believe it, because 18-year-old me didn't believe that was possible. So it's challenging to quickly articulate the enormity of Nathaniel Branden, what kind of legend he is. A lot of people have done that already today. Some people touch many lives. Nathaniel profoundly changed many lives, millions of lives. Clearly, all of us today are deeply affected by him, but people don't realize the extent of how much he's affected the world and the conversations we're having today. Nathaniel has influenced our understanding of ideas and our understanding of ourselves, and he was a giant who left his mark on the world. I got into him because I got into Ayn Rand, and I was a big Ayn Rand fan. And I felt when I was 14, 15, I learned a lot from Ayn Rand. But in my later teens, I felt like I grew a lot by getting into the books of Nathaniel Branden. He didn't just teach people about ideas, he taught people how to transform themselves and become better people. One of those times I had while I was giving him rides and I was talking to him, I told him that you're known as the father of the self-esteem movement. You've influenced a lot of psychologists and people around the world, and self-esteem is on all of your book covers. But actually, I think that's all nonsense. You're not teaching self-esteem. You're teaching people how to become better people. Self-esteem is just a consequence. And he really appreciated that, actually. He actually agreed with me. I was surprised. I would like to personally thank Nathaniel Branden for the wisdom and guidance I gained from his books. That helped me to develop and grow to the point that one day I might be honored to speak at his memorial and give tribute to him. To me, this is one of the biggest honors in my life, and I appreciate it. The truth is, this is a great honor, but this is also a little bit sad to acknowledge that I've lost someone that I've loved so much. And the truth is that Nathaniel has not left us. If you look around the world today, you can see his influence everywhere. Thank you so much for listening.
All right, thank you. And now, Lee, would you like to help us end the proceedings? Lee Branden.
Sorry about the cheat sheet. I figured I'd be very emotional, so I'm relying on my printed paper. I would like to thank a few people, but first, I would like to thank all of you who gathered together to honor Nathaniel. It's really a tribute to him that you're all here. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for honoring him like this. I want to publicly thank those people for whom the act of remembering Nathaniel merited going above and beyond the call of duty. John Fickewirth, John Ebell Center, and Jay LaPierre. On behalf of myself and for Nathaniel as well, your generosity and willingness to help is very much appreciated. In addition, I offer a second note of thanks for John Fickewirth. During the last few years of Nathaniel's life, John repaid back many times over that which he has said Nathaniel had given to him. I cannot adequately convey the thanks and appreciation for the very tangible quality of life, the things you gave him, the support you were to both of us. It did not escape Nathaniel either. The love and respect you had for him, and it was mutual. Thank you all.